Hi, I'm Peter J. Ray. Welcome to Adventures in History. Today's topic is Augusta Fisher Smallshaw, 1989, Part 1. This was originally published as Smallshaw Family Memories Collection, or SFMC number 6. This is an interview I conducted with my grandmother, my mother's mother, Augusta Smallshaw, on September 4th, 1989. Today is September 4th, 1989, Labor Day. We're in Rocky River, Ohio. With us today is my grandmother, Mrs. Augusta Lillian Fisher Smallshaw. Good afternoon, Mrs. Smallshaw. Glad to have you with us.
Glad to be here, Peter.
Now, we've had some very good tapes so far. I know that everyone has enjoyed all the different things you've had to say. You've talked a lot about politics and the royal family of Great Britain, but today I thought we could go back and talk about your genealogy and my genealogy. First of all, let's start with your parents. What were your parents' names?
My dad's name was Herbert Shadrach Fisher, and he was born in 1854. He was born in London, England. My mother's name was Julia Barham, and she was born in Clare, Suffolk, 30 miles north of London, a very, very pretty village. My older sister's name was Sissy Annie Fisher, and I am next, Augusta Lillian Fisher, and my brother, not quite 2 years younger than me, Alfred Morris Fisher. We were all born in England. My sister, brother, and I were all born in Southwold, a very, very scenic seaside place up the coast of the North Sea, a little bit farther north of Ipswich. Ipswich is where my mother and father were married. Ipswich, Suffolk. They got married in 1896. My dad and mother and older sister and younger brother and I came to Canada in 1903. In 1908, another little sister was born in Canada. It was on the prairie of Saskatchewan. Mother and Dad called her their little prairie chicken. They named her Isabel Norma, and we always called her Norma.
Did your father have any brothers or sisters?
Yes, my dad had a brother 2 years older than himself named Alfred. He had a little brother 2 years younger than himself that died, a baby boy. His mother died having the fourth son. Her and the baby both died. Dad was only 4. He said he remembers going to his mother's funeral, walking to the funeral. He said he could always remember that because in England they usually wear little knickers above their knee. The family bought him a pair of long trousers. He said he could always remember walking to his mother's funeral with these long pants on.
How old was she when she died?
I have no idea how old she was.
She bore 4 boys?
4 boys.
No girls?
No girls. Were there only 2 boys that lived?
Were there only 2 boys that lived?
Yes, Alfred and my dad. Some relations took baby Billy and he died.
How old was he when he died?
I don't know, but he was only 2 when his mother died, and the 4th baby died at birth along with his mother.
What were your dad's parents' names?
I don't know what my dad's mother's maiden name was, but my dad's father's name was Shadrach Fisher. He was a big businessman in London. He had a whole flock of what they call hansom cabs. That was in the 1800s. He was very busy with his business. He had a housekeeper for a few years, and then he married a girl by the name of Emily Rush. She was my dad and Alfred's stepmother. She was a very, very cruel stepmother. The dad was away at business most of the time. When the boys did anything that displeased her, she'd send them up to their bedroom and lock the door without any supper. They were 2 growing boys, and they really half-starved. If it wasn't for the lady next door and her little daughter Millie felt so sorry for the poor boys. They felt sorry for themselves because they were thirsty and hungry. In England at that time they had loaves of bread that they called cottage loaves, a round loaf. She'd cut up slices of bread and butter them, and to get them up to the boys, she'd put them on a long broom. I hope it was clean, and hoist it up to the boys, 1 slice at a time. It really kept them from starvation, from getting sick. My dad was over 6 feet tall. Alfred was shorter and more thick-set. Millie would play ball with them, bounce a ball up to the window. My dad and his brother were so thankful for Millie and her mother. I don't know what their last name was, but the little girl's name was Millie. When my dad was in foreign service in Egypt, he thought that when he got back to England, he was going to look up Millie, and if she was single, he was going to ask her to marry him. London is a big, big city, and he lost track of her, never did find her. She likely got married. So that was a very hard period in my dad's life, a very cruel stepmother. In her married life, she had one daughter. In England, your social status is by different schools. A lot of people send their children away to school, and they sent her away to school. She got to be quite a society woman and married a quite well-to-do man. When she got into that state, she was ashamed of her mother. So she really got paid back for being cruel to the boys, I consider. Your father's name was Herbert? Herbert Shadrach Fisher. His brother's name was Alfred? Alfred Fisher. And your brother's name was Alfred? Well, the two boys were so close to one another, being that they had such a cruel stepmother, that when they got married, Alfred got married and had one boy and 3 girls. He named his boy Herbert after his only brother. My dad, when he got married, he didn't get married until he was 42. When he got married, he had my older sister and I and a boy. He named him Alfred after his brother. Did you keep track of your Uncle Alfred and his family? Did they come to Canada? Oh no, they stayed in England. He was in business like his dad in London. He was quite a businessman and got to drinking with his customers. He got to be alcoholic, and he died from, what did they call it? Cirrhosis of the liver. Did you ever meet him? Oh yes, when we were living in London. Their family lived in London. They lived at a place called Shepherd's Bush. His wife used to entertain us quite often, Mother and Dad and us 3 kids. She had 2 high chairs. My little brother sat in one high chair and I sat in the other. My Uncle Alfred was a great tease. I remember having a piece of cake at the table on the high chair, and I was quite a conservative. I would pick out all the raisins to eat at the last, eat the cake and then save the raisins for the last. He would always pretend to steal my raisins. Ha 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 ha. Did you see him when you came back to England as an adult? Oh no, he died shortly after we got to Canada. Do you know where his family is? Have you lost track of them? Absolutely, lost track of them. When George and I went back in 1924, we visited Sissy's daughter, and she lived in London. She worked at her husband's big furniture place, Betty, the eldest one. She married a fellow by the name of Herbert Hellion. His brother had a big furniture store. His son worked with him. His dad was quite a slave driver, I would say. Anyway, she went with this young fellow for 7 years. They had long engagements in England at that time. They were only married 5 years when his dad insisted he come to work when he had a bad cold. Well, they took him to the hospital and he died. They had one little boy named Stanley. She was expecting her second child when he died. They named her Betty. When George and I went to London, England, we looked them up. We stayed with Sissy. She was working at the furniture store. We came back to Canada, and then the Depression came along, and we never went back. I wrote to them a few times. That was Alfred's oldest daughter. So you had 4 grandparents, Grandma and Grandpa Fisher, and Grandma and Grandpa Barham. Yes. Did you meet all 4 of them? No. I met Mother's mother, Susan Barham. She got married again. Your mother's name was Julia Barham? Yes. Shadrach Fisher was your grandpa. Mother talked about what a nice person he was. I remember Mother and Dad going to his funeral. She got somebody to stay with us 3 little kids. Well, you know George's grandparents. In 1924, when George and I went to England, I met his grandparents, William Smallshaw, and his grandmother. A fine man, William Smallshaw. He didn't come to Canada? No. Now, George's parents were Christine and George Smallshaw. Christine Turner. So he had Grandma and Grandpa Smallshaw and Grandma and Grandpa Turner. But none of them came to Canada? None. We were the only adventuresome birds. The Smallshaws came from Lancashire. A wold is a forest, and Southwold is south of the wold. Southwold is on the coast of the North Sea, and that's where I was born, just a little bit south of Great Yarmouth in Suffolk County. My mother and dad were married in Ipswich, which is very close by. Lancashire is coal mining country. That's the industry there. They had a coal explosion there, and 500 men were killed. George's mother helped lay out the dead to get ready for the coffin. It was the saddest part of her whole life. She made up her mind. She had 2 sons, that her sons were not going to go down into the mine. When we went there, the men would come out, and you couldn't tell who they were. Their faces were so black. George's dad was a coal miner, worked with his dad, William Smallshaw. He was a big man. When he came home, he'd strip down to his waist, and he had a big back. I remember looking at his back, and it had purple marks where coal had broken the skin. So George's dad gave up coal mining. Well, he came to Canada. He got married at 19. Were the Smallshaws all coal miners? Well, George's eldest sister Elsie went to work in a cotton mill when she got out of school. What was the family work background of the Fisher family? Well, they had the handsome cab business in London, drawn by horses, cobble streets. Alfred worked for his dad till he was 19, then started his own business. My dad worked for his dad till he was 24. In England, when they work for their parents, all they are given is their spending money and their clothes. My dad realized when he was 24 was all he was getting was older, so he wanted to break away. His dad could claim him, and he needed him. I don't know what Dad did in the business, but he helped somehow. He wanted to break away, and he didn't know how to do it. So he figured out a way, and I thought it was pretty smart. You might say he ran away from home. He changed his name. He decided to join the army, so he joined the Royal Artillery. In the Royal Artillery, there's an awful lot to learn, so he thought he'd be learning a lot. He changed his name to Henry S. Finch, because everything had to have an initial on it. Boxes for their clothes and all their clothes. So he thought after all, if he wanted to change back to his real name, he'd still have the proper initials, which I thought was pretty smart of my dad. He was Henry S. Finch for I don't know how many years. If his dad tried to claim him, if he came looking for him in the army, he couldn't find a Fisher, because his name was Finch. Did your dad tell you what his dad, Shadrach Fisher, was like? Yes, he said he was a very good father, except that he couldn't see what the stepmother was doing to the boys. Dad was a bachelor till he was 42, and he had 3 kids in a few years. How did he meet your mom? Well, I have no idea how they met, but they met. I don't think they had a very long engagement. 6 months, I imagine, something like that. They were married in 1896. I was born in 1897. My sister was born in 1896. They got married in May. My brother was born the 1st of October. Mother and Dad had 3 children in 3.5 years. Did he have girlfriends during all that time before he got married? Oh, I'm sure he had a lot. In his uniform, he had a little swagger stick, and I believed him. When I was a little girl, I said, Dad, what is that stick for? He said, Oh, that's to keep the girls off my back. Ha, ha, ha. He joined the Royal Artillery, and they had a militia in Egypt. They had volunteered because it's a very rugged climate. He volunteered to go away for 3.5 years. His brother had 3 daughters, so he had 3 nieces, and the 3 girls were very fond of their Uncle Herbert. When he was in Egypt, they had big ostriches there. The fashion was to wear a hat with a big ostrich feather. That was the height of fashion. Dad used to get the best ostrich feathers he could buy and send them to his 3 nieces in London. They thought their Uncle Herbert was just tops. When he got married, that stopped all that. Anyway, he volunteered for 3.5 years. He got a very good pension for it. He also got an allowance for, in England, they had beautiful quality material for their uniforms. When they were in Egypt, they had just gotten the cotton stuff, so they had extra consideration for the cheaper uniform. He was there for 3.5 years, and most or all of them went back to England. They sailed from the port of Alexandria. They were in Cairo, Egypt, and sailed out of the port of Alexandria back to England. He volunteered for another 3.5 years to up his pension. He went to see his chums off, and he said that was a terrible heartbreak. He wanted to go so badly, and he had volunteered for 3.5 more years. I think then that he wished he hadn't, because he was so homesick to go back to England, to see his brother and his father who was still alive. So he spent 7 years in Egypt. And he took no trips back to England during that time? No, there wasn't much transportation back then. They didn't fly around like we do now. How long of a trip by boat was that? Alexandria to England? Well, passage of boats was pretty slow. It took us 10 days from Liverpool to Quebec. Were there English women in Cairo? Yes, a lot of men brought their wives, and a lot of them died. My dad thought it was so cruel, so selfish of the men to bring their wives, because there was no refrigeration and no air conditioning. They just suffered from the heat, and a lot of the English women died. My dad said that he wouldn't be that selfish to ask an English girl to come out there. Were there any single English girls there? No, there were no English girls that were available. Did he go out with Egyptian women? Never. He was there for 7 years without female company. Right. The Egyptians hated the English there. The men wouldn't dare go for a walk except in twos, one to look at the back and one to look in front, because the Egyptians would run up from behind and stab them in the back. Did your father say why he didn't want to go out with Egyptian women? Well, they were just Egyptians. They were inferior. Ha! A completely different people. So your dad was really a pillar in the British Empire, eh? He really was. 22.5 years, and he had a medal for it. Did they have any fighting in Egypt? No, I don't think so. They were practicing with their guns and cannons. I don't think he ever saw any live action, not like my brother Alfred, nothing like that. When my dad got back to England in 1900, the Boer War was on. He volunteered for that, but there were so many single soldiers that the government wouldn't take a married man with 3 children because it was a bigger obligation. They had enough single men to go to the Boer War in South Africa. It was a good thing that he didn't go. Yeah, he could have got killed. That was a bad war. Winston Churchill was a reporter in the Boer War. Was that between the English and Dutch down in South Africa? Yes, I imagine it was. My dad had 2.5 years of military service at the Rock of Gibraltar. He just loved it there, said it was beautiful. Well, they have a nice breeze up there from the ocean. Marvelous compared to terrible hot Egypt. He was in Gibraltar after Egypt. He was telling us about the hyenas in Egypt. They were terrible. Quite a few of the men died from the heat in such rigid conditions. They would bury them 6 feet down. The hyenas would claw down to get them. Terrible, vicious, starving animals. Oh, he loved Gibraltar. That's Spain, right? It isn't Spain, it's a British stronghold. It was Spanish before, wasn't it? It could have been. Did he learn any Spanish there? I don't think so. He got along with the people better there than the Egyptians. He also worked for 2.5 years in the Channel Islands, Guernsey, Jersey, Alderney, and Sark, and I believe he was on Jersey. He used to tell us about the Jersey cows that made such wonderful milk. The Channel Islands are in the English Channel between England and France. He liked Jersey. It's a lovely spot, very English. My friend Irene Hood, when she goes to England, she goes there. She has friends there, and she just raves about it. I've never been there. I'd like to. He also was stationed in London. He worked at the Tower of London.
What was the chronology of his military service?
He started out in England, then went to Egypt, Gibraltar, the Channel Islands, and back to England. He liked the Channel Islands the best, nice and relaxed. A lot of French people living there also. My father had decided not to get married. After he got his discharge from the army, he planned to go live in Nice, in the south of France. Supposed to have the nicest climate. I was telling Patty this. He was going to retire and live there. But he met Mother, 24 years younger than himself, Julia Barham. It was love at first sight, and it stayed. They had a very good marriage. He idolized Mother, thought she was just wonderful, and she thought he was wonderful. They got married in 1896, and Dad died in 1917. 22 years in the Army, and 21 years with Mother. His father and stepmother sent the two boys to a Church of England boys' school. The other boys in the school, their mothers sent them cakes and all sorts of treats. Poor Alfred and Herbert never got a thing. Their stepmother never sent them anything. My dad was 4 years old when his mother died. Alfred was 6. He may have been 16 when he graduated from school, and he was 24 when he joined the Army. I've got a picture of him when he was 24. I don't know how old he was when he went to boarding school. He never told us. The boarding school was in London someplace. He was in the Army for 23 and a half years, and he got a medal for it. I said, "Dad, what's this medal for?" He said, "For keeping my nose clean for 23 and a half years. I thought, my goodness, it would take a lot of handkerchiefs for that. Ha ha ha. He meant that he kept to the laws.
What kind of personality did your dad have?
Marvelous personality. I admired him very much, still do. He was the perfect man. He was the best father a child could have. He insisted that we be strictly honest. He used to say,
"A thief you can trust while you're watching him. A liar you can never trust."
He had a good sense of humor, and he never flew into a temper. Very calm, very just. I was about 20 when he died.
To be continued. Well, that concludes today's presentation. Augusta Fisher Smallshaw, 1989, Part 1. Good luck to you with your efforts in family history, if this interests you. Finding, preserving, and sharing old letters, diaries, and photographs, and interviewing elderly relatives while they're alive. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. God bless you. Take care. And I'll see you next time.